Today's workshop was about supervision, and in particular about the transferential processes that happen in supervision, by which I mean what's the kind of stuff that we get left with in the room, the feelings that might not belong to us. And the reason for looking at that is because, especially in the face of trauma, it's really important that we can own what belongs to us and what doesn't belong to us, so that we don't carry away more than we need to. So it might be, for instance, that you're sitting with a supervisee and they're talking to you about their client, and you find yourself feeling really irritated, and there isn't any reason why you might be irritated because the person's just telling you a story. But if you stop and think about what might be going on for you, and you note it, and you can then in some way bring that into the conversation, maybe asking the supervisee how they feel about the client, if they could take their professional hat off and say whatever they wanted about this client. It might sound completely outrageous, but actually if you can get into that felt sense, which often if you are, as a supervisor, are feeling irritated, it might be that they're actually feeling really irritated with their client, but it hasn't been spoken, but it's been transferred in the telling of the story. You can then begin to work at a much deeper level about what's going on, rather than just tell the narrative, to really get into the feeling sense of the work, and that can then help you as the supervisor to support the therapist to maybe think about what they might want to do differently within the work, to help the work also move on to a deeper level. I think the biggest thing I want to share with people is the importance of paying attention to this moment, to this here and now moment. Because if we pay attention to what's going on to this moment, we've got a lot more information than we think we've got. And it also helps us to look after ourselves as well. I guess I'd like to encourage people when they're in supervision to be as creative as they possibly can be. And that isn't just supervisors suggesting creativity. It's also about supervisees saying, please, can we do this? Because it really gets beyond the top layer of the story to what the work is really underneath about. Well, I started off like most people do as a play therapist, and I'd also done a training to work with adults as well. And most people who do what I did at the beginning of my career, which was working 5 days a week with clients who are quite traumatised, after a couple of years feel the impact of that. So, but we've also got to earn a living, and we also want to grow I wanted to grow in my development. I knew I couldn't carry on doing 5 days in school, so I looked to see how I could use the skills that I'd already gained to find a slightly different pathway, and that's how I got into supervision. Encouraged by Monica, because at the time, we're talking 20 years ago now, at the time there was a dearth of supervisors, so she was very keen for people who were qualified to train so that we could pass on the skills that we had as play therapists within the creative supervision space. And it's kind of grown from there. For me, I would say supervision is what goes in the diary first, and the rest of my client work gets fitted around it. Because without that support, firstly support, but also that space where you can go and be curious about your work, we're not very good practitioners. Supervision is a space to be curious.